$4 slapped down on the warped courthouse step, and the pregnant woman with the burlap bag over her head flinched at the sound. Her hands tied in front of her, jerking once, before she forced them still while the wind knifed through Cedar Gulch and carried every word the sheriff said into the ears of the half-circle of men gathered in the mud. Eli Carver stood near the back of that circle with his coat still smelling of wet pine and horse sweat, broad shoulders aching from 6 straight days in the timber. He watched the sheriff hold the woman by the upper arm like she was a restless calf, watched the rough sack rise and fall with her thin breath, and felt his jaw clamp so tight it sent pain up behind his eyes. Cedar Gulch held little more than a saloon, a church, a store, and a scatter of houses. But any time a life went cheap, the street filled, boots crowding the ruts, hats jammed low against the grey sky. Now there were maybe 30 men pressed in around the courthouse steps, horses tied 3 deep along the rail, rifle butts knocking against wood as the cold made fingers fidget. The sheriff lifted his chin, voice flat. "County sale," he called. "Name on the paper is unknown female. Found near the rail spur near to freezing. Hospital bill and court fees come to $4 and some change." He jerked the rope at the woman's wrists, just enough to make the sack turn toward the crowd. "Debtor's got no kin answering, so the county owns her labor till the ledger's clean. Buyer gets 1 year's work or until the child's weaned, whichever comes last." There was a murmur at that. Some men shifting, some grinning. The sack could not hide how round her belly was, how close to the edge of carrying she had to be. A saloon keeper named Rig, with 1 gold tooth and a coat too fine for his work, spat, and said he'd take her off the county's hands for $2 and a spot sweeping floors. Everyone knew he meant on her knees in the back rooms, more than with a broom. Another voice called 3, laughing. A ranch hand from Price's Spread who boasted he could always use another set of hands in the cook shack. Eli's fingers curled in his gloves until the scars across his knuckles ached white. He had come to town for flour and a new file, nothing more. His wagon sat already half-loaded in front of the store. The road up to his cabin on Sawtooth Ridge would go slick before sundown, but the sight of that sack and the sound of men joking over the life under it made something old and bitter rise in his throat like splintered wood. "4," Rig called. "Lazy, sure of the win." He tipped his head toward the sheriff. "You know my rooms are warm, Hank. Girl won't freeze." He grinned at the crowd. Might even make enough on her first week to pay this robbery back. Eli stepped forward before he knew he was moving, boots sucking in the mud, voice coming out rough and low. "5," he said, the single word cutting through the noise. Heads turned. The sheriff's eyes snapped to him. "Carver," he said, surprise and warning tangled together. "You sure you want this trouble? You ain't had a woman under that roof since—" He let it hang, since Eli's wife Hannah had died under a falling pine 3 winters back. Since Eli had buried his own heart under frozen needles. Eli swallowed once, feeling the old hurt move like a slow river under the new anger. "5," he repeated, clearer, "and I'm not buying trouble. I'm buying her out from under yours." Rig sneered, stepping down a plank to stand closer. "You gonna play savior now, lumberman?" he asked. "Or just lonely? You think she's any kind of bargain full of somebody else's brat and hospital rot?" Eli turned his head just enough to let his eyes meet Rig's, the look flat as cut stone. "I think you don't get to own everyone who falls in the street," he said. "And if you're set on arguing with me over it, we can leave the sheriff out of it and settle our accounting behind the livery." The sheriff lifted a hand like he was tired down to the bone. "5 covers it," he said, voice sharper. "Coin in my hand, and she's off county paper. What happens after that is between Carver and his own conscience." He held out his palm, nodding once to Eli. "Your money if you're fool enough, and if you ain't, step back now." Eli reached into his coat, fingers brushing the leather cord around his neck where Hannah's ring hung. He touched it once like a promise, then pulled out the folded cloth roll that held most of what he'd saved. He thumbed out 5 silver pieces, each one bought with long days and a back that burned. He set them in the sheriff's hand, heard them clink like small gravestones, and knew there was no going back. The sheriff closed his fist over the coins and tucked them into his vest, then turned and shoved the rope toward Eli. "Debt's yours now," he said, "and so is every fool word that comes with it." Rig cursed low and turned away, disgusted, but the look he shot Eli said the matter wasn't done, not by a mile. Eli stepped up onto the plank beside the woman, the burlap sack hanging heavy over her shoulders. He could smell sweat, old smoke, the sharp, sour edge of fear trapped in the cloth. "Easy," he murmured, more to calm his own hands than hers. "I'm taking this off. You ought to see the sky, if nothing else." The knot at the back of her neck was tight, dug into skin rubbed raw. He worked it loose with thick, calloused fingers until it gave. The sack sagged and he pulled it up and away. The crowd leaned in like one creature, hungry to see the face that came with the scandal. She was younger than the line of her shoulders had suggested, maybe mid-20s, with hollow cheeks, a healing bruise along one jaw. Brown hair hacked uneven at her neck as if someone had cut a long braid in anger. Her eyes were dark and steady, not wild, not broken, just tired in a way Eli recognized from his own mirror. She blinked in the grey light, looked over the crowd once, saw nothing worth fixing her gaze on, then looked up at Eli. "You the one paid?" she asked, voice rough from too many cold nights and too little water. Eli nodded. "I am," he said, "and since that seems to matter more than whatever you might want, I'll tell you this, where every man here can hear me. I bought your debt, not your life. You walk with me. It won't be as a servant. It'll be as my wife under my roof, and anyone thinking otherwise can leave this yard now. Or meet me some other night when we're not standing on the county's porch." People laughed then, some nervous, some mean. The preacher on the church stoop took a half-step forward like he'd been waiting for a crack of light in this storm. The sheriff swore under his breath. "You gonna turn my sale into a wedding, Carver?" he muttered. But there was no real heat behind it, just weary disbelief. The woman studied Eli's face for a long beat, looking for the joke, the trap, not finding it. "You don't know my name," she said. "You don't know whose child this is or what kind of trouble comes with me. You don't know if I kick in my sleep or curse or run when the door opens." Eli held her gaze, feeling every eye in town on the side of his head. "I know nobody else in this yard spoke up for you," he said, "and I know I still wake up reaching for someone who isn't there. Maybe that means I'm ready to be done being alone. Maybe it means I'm a fool, but I'd rather take that chance with you knowing it than let Rig turn you into another ghost." He blew out a breath. "My name's Eli Carver. I cut pine up on Sawtooth. If you'll have my name, you'll have my roof, and we can figure the rest as we go." She looked once at Rig, at the ranch hand from Price's place, at the line of men whose eyes weighed her belly like a piece of meat, then back at Eli. "My name is Lydia Hart," she said, "and I've been owned one way or another since I was 16. If saying yes in this mud means one less rope on my throat, then yes, stand me in front of your preacher before my legs give out." The preacher stepped into the yard like he'd been called. Book already open. He did not ask questions. He had sat at too many hospital beds and jail cells in this town to need more story. He spoke the words over them, with the crowd shuffling and muttering, Eli's big hand closing around Lydia's rope-burned fingers, her face turned up, pale and stubborn. When the preacher said amen, a bird cried somewhere above them, sharp and small, and the sheriff cut the rope at her wrists with his pocket-knife, the fibers snapping with a sound that felt larger than it was. Eli helped Lydia down from the plank, his arm firm under her elbow, her feet sinking into the muck. He led her to his wagon under more stairs than any wedding in Cedar Gulch had ever earned. Rig stood in the saloon doorway, arms folded, eyes narrow. Beside him, a tall man with a trimmed beard and a fine coat watched, Coleman Price, whose brand scarred half the cattle in the valley. He said nothing, but his gaze slid from Lydia to Eli like a blade being drawn. The road up to Sawtooth Ridge was steep and mean in the best weather, worse now with clouds dropping low and wind driving flecks of ice. Eli wrapped a blanket around Lydia's shoulders, handed her a tin cup of coffee he'd bought hot from the store and snapped the reins. The wagon wheels groaned in the frozen ruts, the town slipping away behind them, a smudge of smoke and small-minded talk. They rode a long time without speaking, the creak of the wagon and the horse's breath the only sounds. Finally Lydia said, "You know Price had his man put me on that paper, not the county." Her eyes on the narrow trail ahead. "He paid the doctor to patch me up when his foreman's fists almost killed me, then said the debt was mine, not theirs." She let out a breath that wobbled. "I worked 3 years cooking for his men, washing his table, and when I started to show, he decided he'd rather sell what was left than have his wife look at me." Eli felt his hands tighten on the reins, jaw grinding. The tree that killed Hannah had not meant malice. It had been dumb weight and bad luck. But what Lydia described was something chosen, sharpened. "Who's the father?" he asked quietly. "Price?" Lydia shook her head, hair brushing the blanket. "One of his sons," she said, voice flat. "And he's in San Antonio now, rich and free and bragging. Price's wife washed her hands of me, said I'd tempted the boy with my eyes." She glanced at Eli like these are worth that much trouble. She snorted once, humorless. "So Price paid my doctor bill and had his lawyer write that paper. Wasn't a thing I could do but stand there while they argued numbers over my bed." Eli stared ahead at the line of trees, their black trunks rising like a wall. "I can't give you justice for all that," he said. "Not the kind the world owes you, but I can give you a roof Price doesn't hold a claim on and a name that wasn't bought with blood. You might not think that's much, but it's what I've got." She studied him a moment, then nodded once, small. The motion tired but real. "It's more than anyone else has offered without asking." "To count my tears," she said. "I'll take it till you change your mind, or I learn how to stand on my own legs without leaning on yours." Snow started before they reached the cabin, fine and dry, drifting into the ruts. Eli's place sat tucked under a rock ledge, pine stacked high against one wall, smoke curling from a short stovepipe. Inside it was plain but solid, one big room with a bed, a table, shelves loaded with jars Hannah had filled before the tree took her. Hannah's faded quilt folded neat, waiting. The sight of it put a twist in Eli's chest, but he did not look away. The days that followed cut themselves into hard, simple lines. Dawn, fire, wood, water. Lydia moved careful as the child inside her grew heavy, but she refused to sit idle. She stirred pots, mended shirts, scrubbed the table till the old scars from Hannah's bread knife showed clean. She and Eli learned to pass each other in the small space without colliding, to listen for the rhythms of the other's breathing in the dark. Neighbors in a storm before they were anything else. They talked in little pieces, like men stack kindling, small and necessary, an ember of trust under each. Eli told her about the tree that had kicked wrong, about the way Hannah's body had gone still before he could even lift it free, about the way the forest sometimes sounded like it was laughing at him when he worked alone. Lydia told him about Price's longhouse, about cooking for 12 men on too little fire, about the way the ranch hands had argued over whether her baby would come out looking more like the boss's son or like a ghost. Snow deepened, then began to melt at the edges, the world around the cabin opening from white to brown again. With the thaw came tracks on the ridge road that Eli had not made, half-moon prints of shod horses, more than one set, riders watching from trees so thick you could feel their eyes without seeing their faces. Lydia stood at the window one afternoon, one hand pressed against the small of her back, the other braced on the sill. "They're up there," she said, jaw tight. "Price's men. They ride this way before spring roundups, but never this close. Not without wanting something." Eli wiped his hands on his pants, stepped outside into the thin sun. He could feel it too, the sense of being measured, the forest holding its breath. He kept his rifle on the peg by the door but did not take it down yet, and when the riders finally came into the yard 2 mornings later, 8 of them in dust-streaked hats and trail-worn coats, he was standing on the porch with his hands empty, boots planted wide. Coleman Price rode at their head, his fine coat spattered with mud now, but his beard still trimmed, his eyes still cold. Beside him the foreman who had once put Lydia on the ground with his fists, now with a split lip of his own from some other brawl. Their horses snorted clouds into the chilly air, iron clinking on stone. Price looked at the cabin, then at Eli, then toward the small motion he caught behind the oiled paper window. Lydia's shadow. "Heard you made yourself a wife out of county scrap, Carver," Price said, voice smooth. "That true, or folks in town just talking 'cause there's nothing better to do?" Eli met his gaze. "Accurate enough," he said. "Preacher said the words. Sheriff cut the rope. Every man there heard it." He raised his chin toward Lydia's outline. "Her name's Lydia Carver now, and whatever she was before is done." Price's mouth twisted, the kind of almost smile that never touched his eyes. "See, that's where we differ," he said. "It ain't done, not by a long shot. She was under contract on my spread. Her doctor bill paid by my hand. Her keep paid by my beef. The child she's carrying was sired in my house. My wife's been asking what became of that little problem. I told her the county was handling it. Now I find out you paid $5 for what's mine and walked away smiling. You say mine like you're talking about a calf," Lydia said behind Eli, stepping into the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other on her belly, her face pale but her eyes burning. I cooked your food and slept in your loft, and you still think you own the air in my lungs. Price's gaze flicked to her, cold and assessing. Girl, he said, you owe me more than that wedding band on your hand is worth. You can play wife to this pine cutter in your spare time if he likes, but you ride back with me. We finish what the paper says. I keep you through the birth, then you work in my house till that bill's paid. After that you can run off to any ridge you like. Ely heard the barnyard quiet behind the riders. Birds gone still. Even the dog under the porch held his breath. He stepped down onto the hard-packed dirt, so he stood between Price's horse and the door. I think you and your lawyer have squeezed all you're going to squeeze out of her, he said. Calm. Lydia didn't sign that paper, and even if she had, a marriage spoken in front of half Cedar Gulch weighs more to me than whatever scratches your man made by lamplight. She's not going back to your house. Price's foreman shifted, hand brushing the butt of his pistol. Ely saw every small move, the tightening of reins, the flare of a nostril. We could drag her out of there, the foreman muttered. Nobody'd stop us up here. He thinks these trees belong to him just 'cause he swings an axe. Price frowned, calculating, eyes flicking to the tree line where the shadows thickened. He wasn't a man who liked risk he couldn't measure. He wasn't sure who else might be watching. My patience is long, Carver, he said finally, but not forever. You got maybe 3 days before I ride to town and ask the sheriff why he's letting a man harbor stolen stock. He pulled on his reins. The men turned their horses, hooves tearing up the yard. They rode up to the ridge and vanished among the pines, but Ely could feel them settle there like a weight. Campfire smoke thin on the wind that night, eyes on his roof, the next day and the next. The riders stayed put, not close enough to shoot from the window, not far enough to forget. Lydia woke at every creak of the cabin, sleep a thin blanket that never quite covered her. Ely worked as near the house as he could, hauling logs, splitting wood. Every swing of the axe a way to pound back his own fear. They were pinned without a shot fired, a noose tightening by inches. On the third morning, another set of hoofbeats came up the track, slower, more official. Sheriff Hank with 2 deputies and a half-dozen town men rode into the yard, their rifles in scabbards but their mouths grim. Rig the saloon-keeper among them. Smug. The riders on the ridge shifted, watching. Now Ely stood between 2 pressures, one above, one in front. The sheriff dismounted with a grunt, looked up at the ridge, then at Ely. You sure know how to pick your hills, Carver, he said. Hat low. We got ourselves a claim filed in town, Price saying you stole labor. He had under paper asking me to fetch Lydia down so a judge can look at it. He jerked his head toward the cabin. You and your wife need to come with us. We'll sort it out. Legal. Riggs smirked, leaning on his pommel. Man buys what ain't his and calls it holy, he said. Always ends the same, with rope or ruin. Ely felt Lydia's presence behind him without turning. He could hear her breathing quicken. He took 1 step down from the porch, boots crunching in old snow. Hank, he said, you were there when the preacher spoke. You took my coins. You cut her rope. You know as well as I do that whatever paper Price waves. He did his deals while she was half dead. You drag her to town now heavy with child and hand her back to that house. The law won't wash that stain off you. The sheriff rubbed the bridge of his nose. He had the look of a man who had been pulled in too so often. He'd forgotten what standing straight felt like. I ain't saying it sits right, Ely, he said, but I got ranchers on one side, saloon on the other, and a judge who likes contracts more than people. He flicked a glance up at the ridge, and now I also got armed men camping on the hill, like they're gearing up to shoot any badge rides by. You think I came here 'cause I enjoy this? I came 'cause if this blows, it blows over my town. Ely drew a breath that tasted like iron and pine. You drag her out of here, he said, quiet, and these trees are going to see blood from 3 sides, not just yours. Price's boys will ride down thinking they won. Some young fool up there will take a shot at your back just to feel big, and the baby we've been trying to coax safe into this world will hear guns before it hears its own name. He took another step forward, so close now he could see the stubble on Hank's chin. You want to keep Cedar Gulch from burning? You leave her where she is, and you tell Price and Rigg to chew on the fact that they don't own everything they touch. The deputy on Hank's left snorted. He's threatening the law, he said, hand inching toward his rifle. Rigg's grin widened like he'd been waiting for exactly that. Hank shot the deputy a look. Hold, he snapped, then looked back at Ely, his eyes tired but not dead. You're asking me to walk away from a man with papers in his hand and riders on a ridge, he said. You offering me anything besides a sermon? Eli spread his hands, broad palms empty, shoulders squared. I'm offering you a line, he said. One you can choose to stand on. You decide whose side you're on every time you move your boot, Hank. You already know Price'll squeeze you dry and laugh. Rig'll pour another drink and tell the story his way. No matter what you do, all I've done is pay a debt and give a woman my name so she don't have to sleep afraid of boots outside her door. If that makes me an outlaw in Cedar Gulch, then I guess I picked the right ridge to die on. If you were the one in that yard with riders watching from the trees and the law asking for your wife, would you hand her back to the men who broke her just to keep your own days quiet? And if the way this choice sits in your chest keeps you listening, hitch your wagon to ours and subscribe. There's a whole country of hard decisions out here, and we ride through every one. The yard went quiet enough to hear snow melt. The men shifted, some unable to meet Eli's gaze. Rig opened his mouth, then shut it when he realized no one was laughing with him. Up on the ridge, a horse stamped, the sound sharp. Hank let out a long breath, snow fogging around his words. Hell, he muttered, I signed up to chase drunks, not referee between pride and mercy. He turned his head and raised his voice. Price, you and your boys up there hear me. I ain't dragging this woman off this hill. If you got a quarrel, you bring it to town in daylight, not from behind trees. And you better be ready to tell the judge why you think a contract written over a half-dead girl matters more than the vow you all watched me witness. There was a long pause. Then a voice came down from the ridge. Price is hard but carrying. You walking away from your duty, Hank? I'm walking away from yours, the sheriff shot back. You want to come take her? Do it yourself in front of everyone. See how many ride with you. He wheeled his horse, looking back at Eli. I ain't got the strength to stand between every man and his worst choice, but I can choose my own. Today I choose to leave you on this hill with your wife. He jerked his chin at the deputies. We're done, Rig cursed, spurred his horse as if he'd argue, but one look at the line of men and the rifles they had not quite raised kept him quiet. They rode back down the track, snow and mud splattering up on the ridge. Price and his riders lingered another hour. Then their smoke faded, their silhouettes slipping away. Maybe to plot, maybe to swallow the bitter fact that this time coin and contract hadn't been enough. Eli felt each hoofbeat leave his lungs a little lighter. He turned toward the cabin, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders all at once. Lydia stood in the doorway, face gray, one hand clamped on the frame so hard her knuckles shone, the other pressed low under her belly, her eyes wide with a different pain now. Eli's heart stumbled. Lydia, it's starting, she said through clenched teeth, the words sharp. This child's got a mean sense of timing. The world narrowed to the small circle of the cabin, the fire, the bed, the basin, the work of keeping one woman and one tiny life on the right side of the line between breath and silence. Hours blurred, Lydia cursing in halting bursts, Eli holding her shoulders, fetching water, wiping her brow with a gentleness his big hands had never needed. Felling trees. At one point thunder muttered on the horizon and he thought it was guns before he remembered the riders had gone. Sometime near dawn, when the clouds outside the window were only a shade less black. A thin, fierce cry cut the thick air, high and outraged. Lydia sagged back against the pillows, hair plastered to her neck, eyes wet but blazing. Eli held the slick, squalling bundle in hands that shook, a rush of awe and terror and fierce, stupid joy slamming into him harder than any falling pine. It's a girl, he managed, voice raw. She's loud. Lydia let out a breathless laugh that sounded half like a sob. Good, she said. Means the world'll have to listen when she tells it. No. She reached for the child, fingers trembling. Eli laid the little body in her arms, watched the way Lydia's face changed as she looked down, hard lines softening without losing their strength. Seasons turned. Snow, mud, dust, grass, Cedar Gulch found something else to talk about. Price still held half the valley. Rigg still poured whiskey for men who believed their own stories. But every once in a while, someone would point towards Sawtooth Ridge and mutter about the lumberjack who'd bought a pregnant stranger with a bag on her head, taken it off in front of God and everybody, and stood his ground when both money and law leaned on his door. Eli and Lydia did not think of themselves as legend. They thought of chopping wood, mending shirts, wiping mashed beans from their daughter's face, of arguing over how many logs to sell and how many to keep, of how to tell a child someday that she had been born at the hinge of a choice that could have gone colder, darker, rougher. Some nights, when the girl slept in a box near the fire, and the wind hummed low in the pines, Eli sat on the step with Lydia's head on his shoulder, their hands linked, his thumb rubbing the knotted line of old rope scars on her wrist. He'd look out over the dark shapes of the hills and think of that day in the mud, of 5 coins, a burlap sack, a simple word spoken louder than his fear. He knew he hadn't changed Cedar Gulch or men like Price and Rigg. Not really. But he'd carved out one small clearing where a woman and her child lived under a name chosen, instead of a contract forced, where no bag would ever drop over that little girl's face while men joked about her worth, and on a hard land in a hard time that felt like a kind of victory a man could live and die with if riding this trail with them. Left your boots a little heavier and your heart a little more sure of what kind of choice you'd make in the mud. Stay close to the fire, subscribe here, to the Wild Frontier Tales, and come hear the next story of stubborn hearts and rough country where honor still has a chance to swing an axe at the dark.